The rusty fuel barrel outside Rebecca Morgan's tent leaked that familiar petroleum smell that somehow felt like home. At 24, she had earned a reputation as the finest combat medic Outpost Viper had ever seen, though most soldiers simply called her Doc and left it at that. Her medical bay stood in stark contrast to the organized chaos surrounding them, sterile, ordered, everything in its precise place. "Morgan!" Sergeant Mills barked from across the compound, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Medical inventory report, now." "Already completed, Sergeant," Rebecca replied calmly, holding up a meticulously organized sheet that included every item down to the extra hemostatic gauze from yesterday's supply drop. Mills paused, momentarily surprised by her efficiency, then grunted what might have been approval before moving on to berate someone else. This was life at the remote outpost nestled in Afghanistan's unforgiving mountains. Rebecca had been here 6 months, long enough to understand the unspoken hierarchy that governed everything. To the operators, she was support personnel essential when bullets started flying, invisible when they didn't. She kept soldiers alive, patched them up, and sent them back into harm's way. Nothing more, nothing less. A worn photograph was taped to the wall beside her cot, showing an elderly man in hunting gear with a rifle balanced casually in his arm. He stood beside a much younger Rebecca on what appeared to be a misty mountain ridge back in Maine. His weathered face bore the same determined expression that occasionally flashed across Rebecca's features when she thought no one was watching. "Doc, got a minute?" The voice belonged to Specialist Rodriguez, holding out his arm where a deep gash was poorly covered with a hastily applied bandage. Blood had already soaked through the makeshift dressing. "What happened this time?" Rebecca asked, already reaching for her medical kit with practiced efficiency. "Caught it on some concertina wire during perimeter check," he explained, wincing as she removed the blood-soaked bandage. "Wasn't paying attention like I should have been," as she cleaned and sutured the wound with swift, confident movements. Rodriguez studied her face with curious intensity. "You got steady hands, Doc. Ever handle a weapon with that kind of precision?" Her fingers paused almost imperceptibly before continuing their work. "I know enough to qualify," she said evenly. "But my job is putting soldiers back together, not taking enemies apart." Rodriguez nodded, accepting the deflection. "Fair enough. Though the way things are heating up around here, might not hurt to brush up on your marksmanship skills." Rebecca didn't respond, focusing instead on completing the neat row of stitches. What Rodriguez couldn't see was the momentary distance in her eyes, the muscle memory in her fingers that knew far more than basic qualification with a service weapon. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "The rifle doesn't make the shooter, little bird. The heart decides whether our gift serves life or death." Later that evening, as the sun set behind the towering peaks, casting the valley in deepening purple shadows, Rebecca sat outside her medical tent writing a small leather-bound journal. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like routine medical notes or personal thoughts. In reality, it contained detailed calculations of wind patterns, elevation adjustments, and ballistic trajectories, all meticulously documented from the bullet wounds she had treated over the past months. The data told a story that troubled her. The entry profiles of certain gunshot injuries didn't match typical enemy weaponry. The tissue damage suggested higher velocities, the entry wounds unnervingly precise. Someone out there was using specialized equipment, and they were very good. With a dot in the distance, the mountains loomed like silent sentinels, harboring threats both known and unknown. Tomorrow, Operation Iron Serpent would take them deep into that unforgiving terrain. Rebecca closed her journal, her thumb brushing over the worn leather corner, where her grandfather's initials were embossed in faded gold. Harold Morgan. She whispered to herself, touching the brass cartridge hanging on a thin chain beneath her uniform. I hope I never have to break my promise. But as she stared into the gathering darkness, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would test more than just her medical skills. The anomalies in the wound patterns, the increasing sophistication of their opposition, the way certain operations seemed to go wrong at precisely the worst moments, it all pointed to something larger than random, insurgent activity. Her grandfather had taught her to trust her instincts, to see patterns where others saw only chaos. And right now, every instinct she possessed was screaming that Operation Iron Serpent was walking into something far more dangerous than anyone realized. The petroleum smell from the leaking barrel seemed suddenly oppressive, mixing with the mountain air to create an atmosphere of impending change. Rebecca had spent 5 years honoring her promise to use her inherited abilities only to heal, never to harm. But she was beginning to understand that sometimes the greatest protection required embracing all aspects of her training. The Morgan. I had been quiet for too long. Tomorrow, it might have no choice but to awaken. 20-8 years earlier. Ridgeway. Maine 8-year-old Rebecca Morgan followed her grandfather through the dense pine forest, her small boots crunching softly on the carpet of fallen needles. Harold Hawk Morgan moved with a silent grace that belied his 65 years, each step placed with deliberate care to avoid creating unnecessary sound. While most girls her age were watching Saturday morning cartoons, Rebecca was learning to become invisible. "Remember, little bird," Harold whispered, using his special nickname for her. "The forest has 1,000 eyes and ears. To move among them, you must become part of them." They reached a small clearing where morning light filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Harold crouched down, motioning for Rebecca to do the same. From his backpack, he produced a small pair of binoculars. "Today, we learned to see what others miss." The Morgan family property sprawled across 300 acres of pristine woodland in Ridgeway, Maine. The land had been in the family since 1779, when Rebecca's ancestor, a sharpshooter in the Continental Army, had been granted the tract for his service during the Way's Revolutionary War. What few knew was that marksmanship had been a Morgan family tradition ever since. From the Civil War to World War II, Korea to Vietnam, the Morgan men had served as elite marksmen. Harold himself had been part of a classified operation in 1980, officially recorded as a helicopter pilot, but his actual role had been much more specialized. "Most people look, but they don't see," Harold explained, adjusting the binoculars for Rebecca's smaller face. "A hunter's eye notices the broken twig, the disturbed earth, the patterns that don't belong." For hours, they remained motionless, observing the woodland creatures that emerged when they believed themselves alone. Harold taught her to read the forest, how to distinguish the alarm call of a blue jay from its normal chatter, how to spot the subtle movement of a white-tailed deer through dense underbrush nearly half a mile away. Only when the sun reached its zenith did Harold finally stand, his knees cracking slightly. "Come on, little bird. Time for the next lesson." They hiked deeper into the property until they reached a natural ridge overlooking a distant meadow. Harold unfolded a small shooting mat and placed a weathered leather case on the ground. From it, he removed a bolt-action .22 rifle that had been modified for a smaller frame. "This was my first rifle," he said, running his hand lovingly along the wooden stock. "My father gave it to me when I was 10. I've adjusted it for you." Rebecca's eyes widened. She'd seen her grandfather's rifles before, locked safely in the cabinet at the farmhouse, but had never been allowed to touch one. "Father won't approve," she said softly. A shadow crossed Harold's face. His son, Rebecca's father, had broken with family tradition, choosing a career in engineering instead of military service. The first Morgan man in 7 generations not to answer the call. "Your father has made his choices," Harold replied carefully. "But I see something in you, Rebecca. The same thing my father saw in me, the Morgan eye." By the time she was 12, Rebecca could hit targets at distances that would impress military marksmen. By 15, she could calculate wind drift and bullet drop with mathematical precision. Harold never explicitly mentioned military service or combat applications, but the skills he imparted went far beyond recreational shooting or hunting. The training wasn't just about marksmanship. Harold taught her to think strategically, to observe human behavior with the same precision she applied to ballistics. He showed her how to read terrain like others read books, how to identify optimal positions and escape routes with a glance. "The Morgan eye sees patterns, little bird," he would say during their sessions. "Not just where to place a shot, but when. Not just how to eliminate a threat, but whether elimination is truly necessary." On her 16th birthday, Harold took her to a special place on the property, an old service station that had been in the family since the 1950s. Morgan's fuel stop had once been a bustling business when the highway was the main thoroughfare, but had closed in the 80s, when the interstate diverted traffic elsewhere. "This place isn't what it seems," Harold said, unlocking the padlock on the faded red door dot inside. Dust motes danced in beams of sunlight that penetrated dirty windows. Old motor oil cans and vintage advertising signs created the perfect image of an abandoned rural gas station. Harold moved to the back office, where a large wooden desk sat covered in yellowed papers. He pulled the desk aside, revealing a trapdoor set into the wooden floorboards. "During the Cold War," he explained as he lifted the heavy door, "men like me needed safe places off the books." Below was a concrete staircase leading to a fully equipped bunker communications equipment, weapons racks, maps covering the walls, and filing cabinets filled with documents bearing government seals. "This is a Bloodhawk station," Harold said, his voice taking on a reverence Rebecca had never heard before. "What's Bloodhawk?" she asked, running her fingers over a faded emblem on one of the maps, a stylized hawk with a drop of red at its beak. "Officially, nothing. We don't exist in any record. But since 1962, after the Cuban Missile Crisis brought us to the brink, we've been there, making sure it never happens again." Harold's training intensified after that revelation. Rebecca learned about more than marksmanship. She studied tactics, communications, surveillance, and most importantly, the moral framework that governed when such skills should be used. "Power without principle is tyranny," Harold would remind her. "The Morgan eye exists to protect the innocent, not to serve personal ambition or political expedience." But even as Rebecca excelled in every aspect of her training, demonstrating abilities that exceeded even Harold's considerable talents, she remained troubled by the implications of her education. The thought of taking a life, even in service, of a greater good, filled her with unease. Harold seemed to understand her internal conflict. During one particularly intense training session, when Rebecca had achieved a level of precision that bordered on supernatural, he sat her down for a boss, serious conversation. "The greatest warriors, little bird, are often those who understand the true cost of war. Your reluctance isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The Morgan eye should see not just the target, but the consequences of every action." As Rebecca grew older, her abilities continued to develop while her moral reservations deepened. She began to understand that the training Harold provided wasn't just about creating another elite operator. It was about preparing her for choices that might one day define not just her life, but the lives of countless others, the brass cartridge that would one day hang around her. Mech in Afghanistan was still years away, but the foundation of her character was already being established in the forests of Maine. The Morgan eye was awakening, but so was the Morgan conscience that would guide its use. Harold watched his granddaughter with pride mixed with concern, knowing that the world she would inherit would test both aspects of her nature in ways he could barely imagine. September. 5 years before Afghanistan. The rain pelted the church windows like buckshot, providing a grim soundtrack to the hollow words of the military chaplain. 22-year-old Rebecca sat in the front pew, her black dress soaked at the hem from the walk across the cemetery grounds. Her mother, Martha Morgan, clutched her hand with white knuckles as they both stared at the flag-draped coffin. Harold Hawk Morgan, officially recorded as a civilian contractor for the Defense Department, had died in what the government tersely described as an incident in the Middle East. No details provided, no context given, just another unsung casualty in America's endless shadow wars. But Rebecca knew better. 3 weeks earlier, she'd received a coded message from her grandfather, a simple postcard of the Maine coastline with seemingly innocent tourist notes. To trained eyes, it conveyed his final operation, a hostage extraction in northern Syria, targeting a compound where an American aid worker was being held. The rain intensified as the honor guard folded the flag with ceremonial precision. When the captain presented it to Martha, Rebecca noticed the man's hands, calloused in patterns that came from handling specialized weapons, not standard military issue. His eyes met hers briefly, a flash of recognition passing between them. Another bloodhog paying respects to one of their own. After the service, mourners gathered at the Morgan farmhouse. Rebecca moved mechanically through the rituals of grief, accepting condolences from distant relatives and local townspeople who knew Harold as a respected veteran and business owner. Nothing more. As the crowd thinned, a tall man in his 50s approached, his military bearing evident despite civilian clothes. His handshake was firm as he introduced himself to Martha. "James Harrington, ma'am. I served with your father-in-law in Desert Storm. His leadership saved my life more than once." When he turned to Rebecca, his expression shifted subtly. "You have his eyes," he said quietly. Later, when most guests had departed, Harrington found Rebecca alone on the porch, staring out at the rain-soaked fields. "He spoke of you often," Harrington said, leaning against the railing beside her, his little bird with the Morgan eye. Rebecca didn't look at him. "Were you there when it happened?" Harrington's silence was answer enough. Finally, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small brass object, a single rifle cartridge, a .338 Lapua Magnum with words microscopically etched along its length. "He wanted you to have this. Said you'd understand what to do with it." Rebecca took the cartridge, rolling it between her fingers until she could make out the inscription, "Shoot in the space between heartbeats." "What really happened?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. Harrington looked out toward the darkening tree line. "The official report will say he died protecting the extraction team when the primary plan failed. That's true as far as it goes." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What it won't say is that he identified the ambush before anyone else, recognized a pattern in the enemy's deployment that no one should have been able to see. He got the hostage and 3 team members out before ... double quotes," he trailed off. "And they enemy shooters?" Rebecca pressed. 7 confirmed at ranges exceeding what should have been possible given the conditions. "Your grandfather's final mission was extraordinary." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, not just from grief, but from pride. In his final moments, Harold Morgan had embodied everything he'd taught her. "He made me promise him something," she said, after a long silence. "Last Christmas, when I told him I was considering military service, he made me swear I would use what he taught me only to protect, never to harm. That I would find a way to save lives, not take them." Harrington nodded slowly. That sounds like Hawk in his later years. After decades in the shadows, he came to believe the best service was preservation, not elimination. He straightened up, adjusting his coat against the chill. "Whatever path you choose, Rebecca, Know that there are others who will recognize what he saw in you. When the time comes, we'll be there. That night, she drove alone to Morgan's fuel stop. The old service station stood silhouetted against the cloudy night sky, a relic of a bygone era. Using the key Harold had given her on her 16th birthday, she entered the musty interior and made her way to the trapdoor. The bunker was exactly as they'd left it during their last training. Session maps still marked with operational zones. Filing cabinets still organized in Harold's meticulous system. On the central table lay a sealed envelope with her name, written in his steady hand. Inside was a letter and a small key dot, "My dearest Rebecca. If you're reading this, then I've made my final shot. Don't grieve too long. Every Morgan since the revolution has understood that our gift comes with a price. You've wondered why I trained you so intensively when you expressed no desire for military service. The truth is I recognized in you something rare, not just a Morgan eye, but a Morgan heart. You see the target, yes, but you also see the person. This combination is precious and dangerous. Bloodhawk was created with noble intentions to prevent global catastrophe through precisely applied force. For decades, we operated with moral clarity, but institutions age and intentions blur. In recent years, I've seen troubling signs that our original mission has been compromised. The enclosed key opens the floor, safe beneath the weapons rack. Inside, you'll find evidence I've gathered and my personal records. What you do with them must be your choice. Remember what I taught you. The rifle doesn't make the shooter. The eye doesn't make the hunter. It's the heart that decides whether our gift serves life or death. Whatever path you choose, know that I am prouder of you than words can express. You are the finest Morgan I've ever trained, and the best person I've had the privilege to know. Shoot in the space between heartbeats. Little bird. Hawk tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she retrieved the key and moved to the weapons rack. Pushing it aside revealed a small floor safe, which opened with a soft click. Inside was a weathered journal, several microfilm canisters, and a USB drive secured in a waterproof case. She spent the entire night reading her grandfather's journal, absorbing his growing concerns about Bloodhawk operations, his documentation of missions that seemed to serve political or corporate interests rather than genuine security threats. The final entries detailed his investigation into an emerging mercenary group called Crimson Crown, former special operators from various countries operating with tactics suspiciously similar to Bloodhawk protocols. By dawn, Rebecca had made her decision. She would honor both her promise and her grandfather's legacy, but in her own way. She enrolled in medical school the following week, focusing on emergency and combat medicine. The Morgan eye would be used to save lives on the battlefield, not to take them. The brass cartridge became her talisman, worn on a thin chain around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes, a constant reminder of her vow and her heritage. But as she threw herself into her medical studies, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that her grandfather's warning about corrupted institutions would prove prophetic. 5 years later, as she prepared for deployment to Afghanistan, the cartridge hung heavy against her skin. She had kept her promise, using her abilities to heal rather than harm. But Harold's journal had planted seeds of doubt about the true nature of America's conflicts, questions that would soon demand answers in the mountains of Afghanistan. The Morgan eye had been trained for war, but Rebecca Morgan had chosen peace. Soon, she would discover that sometimes the two were inseparable. Present day, Outpost Viper, Afghanistan Colonel James Harrington stood at the edge of Outpost Viper's makeshift helipad, squinting against the swirling dust kicked up by the departing Black Hawk. At 60, his once black hair had surrendered to silver, but his posture remained ramrod straight, his gaze still falcon sharp. 28 years in special operations had carved permanent lines around his eyes and mouth, creating a face that revealed nothing while observing everything. As the helicopter disappeared over the ridgeline, he turned back toward the command center, a reinforced shipping container outfitted with communications equipment and battle maps. Operation Iron Serpent would commence at 0500 tomorrow, sending his best operators into one of the most contested valleys in Kunar province. Intelligence suggested a high-value Taliban commander was using a remote village as a base of operations, possibly holding an American aid worker captured 3 weeks earlier. The mission parameters were straightforward: infiltrate the village, confirm the target's presence, extract the hostage if present, eliminate resistance only if necessary. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, not looking up from the topographical map spread across the table. "Sir, medical inventory for the mission," came a familiar female voice. Harrington glanced up to see combat medic specialist Rebecca Morgan holding a clipboard. For a moment, he kept his expression neutral, though his mind immediately made the connection he'd been anticipating since her assignment to Outpost Viper 3 months ago. "Morgan," he said evenly, "how are the men looking? Any concerns before tomorrow?" "All operational elements are medically cleared, sir," she replied professionally. "I've prepared additional trauma kits based on the terrain assessment. The valley's narrow passages will complicate casualty evacuation if we take casualties." Harrington nodded, studying her face. The resemblance to Harold was subtle but unmistakable, not in her features, which favored her mother's side, but in the quality of attention behind her eyes. "The Morgan Eye," Harold had called it. "You've gone beyond standard preparation," he noted, gesturing to her clipboard. "Those calculations aren't in the standard medical manual." Rebecca hesitated almost imperceptibly. "I've been tracking injury patterns, sir. There's a statistical correlation between elevation changes and the types of trauma we're seeing. I thought it might help prioritize equipment. Mind if I see?" She handed him the clipboard. What appeared at first glance to be medical notes revealed itself to experienced eyes as something far more sophisticated. Rebecca had mapped wound patterns across previous missions, correlating them with terrain features, time of day, and weather conditions. To most officers, it would seem like thorough medical analysis. To Harrington, it was unmistakably an intelligence product, the kind of pattern recognition that distinguished elite snipers and counter-snipers. "Impressive work, Specialist," he said, returning the clipboard. "You have a unique perspective." "Thank you, sir. Just trying to keep our people alive." Harrington gestured to a chair. "Sit for a moment. Coffee?" "No, thank you, sir." He poured himself a cup from the ancient coffee maker in the corner, giving himself a moment to consider his approach. "Morgan," he began, seating himself across from her. "I knew your grandfather." Her expression remained carefully neutral. "Yes, sir. You attended his funeral." "Before that," Harrington continued, "we served together first in Desert Storm officially and in other capacities." He'd watched her reaction closely, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders, the fractional narrowing of her eyes. Controlled, but detectable to someone who knew what to look for. "He was an extraordinary man," Harrington said. "One of the finest operators I ever knew." "Thank you, sir." Harrington leaned forward slightly. "Your analysis here," he tapped the clipboard, "reminds me of his work." He had a way of seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. Rebecca remained silent, her posture perfect, betraying nothing. "I've reviewed your file, Morgan. West Point offered you admission. Your marksmanship qualifications are suspiciously perfect for someone with minimal firearms experience. Yet you chose medical training and enlisted rather than pursuing a commission. I wanted to save lives, sir, not command others to take them." Harrington nodded slowly. "A noble calling. Your grandfather would approve." He paused, then asked quietly, Do you still have the cartridge? The question hung in the air between them. After a long moment, Rebecca reached beneath her collar and withdrew the brass .338 Lapua round on its chain. You said you'd understand what to do with it, Harrington said softly. I do, she replied. I'm doing it now. Harrington studied her with evident respect. Your grandfather and I were part of something, Morgan. Something that began with the noblest intentions, but like many long-standing institutions, developed complications. Bloodhawk, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. So he told you. Harrington's expression wasn't surprised. Enough. Harrington rose and moved to a small safe concealed behind a map of the province. From it, he retrieved a worn leather case, similar to a passport wallet but thicker. He placed it on the table between them. Harold Morgan was more than my colleague. He was my closest friend for 30 years. We joined Bloodhawk together in 1975, served through some of the darkest chapters of the Cold War. When the Soviet Union fell, we thought our work would become simpler. Instead, it became more complex. He opened the case, revealing a small pin with the Bloodhawk emblem, a stylized hawk with a drop of red at its beak. In the early days, our mission was clear. Prevent nuclear war, protect critical infrastructure, eliminate existential threats before they materialized. We operated beyond politics, beyond national interests, focused solely on preventing global catastrophe. His weathered fingers traced the emblem. By the 90s, things had changed. New leadership, new priorities. Bloodhawk began taking assignments that served particular political or economic interests. That's why he was in Syria, Rebecca said. The pieces finally connecting. He wasn't just extracting a hostage. Harrington nodded gravely. He was pursuing evidence against elements within Bloodhawk that had gone rogue. Specifically, connections to a mercenary group called Crimson Crown. I've read his journals. Then, he suspected certain Bloodhawk operations had been compromised, utilized for objectives contrary to our founding principles. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Were you part of that, sir? The directness of the question seemed to age Harrington instantly. No, but I failed him by not supporting his investigation more actively. Caution and career preservation, he admitted with evident shame. By the time I understood the depth of his concerns, it was too late. Before she could press further, the communications officer burst through the door. Colonel, urgent intel. Update from Bagram. Satellite imagery shows unusual movement in the target village. Heat signatures consistent with additional fighters arriving within the last hour. Harrington was instantly on his feet. Get the team leaders. Brief room in. 5. As the officer rushed out, Harrington turned back to Rebecca. We'll continue this discussion when you return from the mission. For now, focus on your medical duties, but keep your eyes open, Morgan. You see things others don't. Rebecca rose, tucking the cartridge back beneath her uniform. Always do, sir. As she prepared to leave, Harrington called after her. Morgan, your grandfather died protecting people. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that legacy. Walking back to her medical bay, Rebecca felt the weight of revelation settling over her like a heavy shroud. The conversation had confirmed what she'd suspected since arriving at Outpost Viper. Her assignment here wasn't coincidental. Harrington had specifically requested her, knowing exactly who and what she was. The brass cartridge seemed to pulse against her skin as she began final preparations for Operation Iron Serpent. Tomorrow would test more than just her medical skills. The anomalies in wound patterns she'd been tracking, the sophisticated opposition they'd been facing, Harrington's warnings about corrupted Bloodhawk operations, it all pointed to a confrontation that would force her to choose between the promise she'd made and the legacy she'd inherited. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. The rifle doesn't make the shooter, little bird. The heart decides whether our gift serves life or death. Tomorrow, in the mountains of Afghanistan, Rebecca Morgan would discover what her heart truly demanded. The night before, Iron Serpent, the medical tent at Outpost Viper, hummed with quiet efficiency as Rebecca made final preparations for the morning. Mission. Each item was checked twice, positioned for maximum accessibility under combat conditions. Lives would depend on her ability to reach the right equipment in seconds. But it wasn't just medical gear occupying her thoughts. The conversation with Colonel Harrington had confirmed her worst suspicions about their opposition. This wasn't random insurgent activity. They were facing something far more sophisticated and dangerous. "Doc, got a minute?" Sergeant Martinez entered, his muscular frame filling the tent entrance. At 34, he was one of the most experienced operators in the unit, with 4 combat tours before this deployment. "Of course. Everything okay for the mission?" Martinez glanced over his shoulder, then stepped fully inside, letting the tent flap close behind him. "That's what I wanted to ask you. Word is you and Lieutenant Wilson had an interesting qualification session last night." Rebecca kept her expression neutral, but her pulse quickened. News traveled fast in the special operations community. Standard procedure before a mission. Nothing standard about hitting a perfect triangle at 25 meters during a mortar attack, Martinez said, his voice low. Not for a regular medic, anyway, so it had spread already. Rebecca studied Martinez's face, reading the mixture of curiosity and respect there. These operators had learned to trust her medical skills implicitly, but now they were seeing glimpses of something else entirely. "What do you want, Sergeant?" Rebecca asked directly. Martinez reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a challenge coin, its metal worn smooth from years of being carried. One side bore the insignia of his original unit. The other had been crudely but effectively etched with a medical caduceus. "Made it myself," he explained, handing it to her. "After what you did for me 2 months ago, pulling that shrapnel from my abdomen when everyone else thought I was done for. Figured you should have something to remember us by." The gesture caught Rebecca off guard. Challenge coins were part of military tradition, symbols of belonging and recognition typically exchanged between members of the same unit. For Martinez to give her one represented rare acknowledgement from the operator community. "Thank you," she said, genuinely moved. "I'll keep it with me." Martinez nodded, then added in an even lower voice, "Look, Doc, I don't know what your story is, and I don't need to. But I've been in this game long enough to recognize when someone's playing a role. Whatever you're hiding, it saved my life." Once already, he moved toward the exit, then turned back. "Wilson knows, too. He's not going to report anything, but he'll be watching you out there today." Martinez paused, his expression deadly serious. "And just so you know, something doesn't feel right about this mission. Too many intel gaps, too many last-minute changes. Keep your head on a swivel." After he left, Rebecca sat motionless, absorbing the implications. Her cover was compromised among at least some of the operators. Yet instead of suspicion, she was being met with cautious acceptance and warnings of danger ahead. She slipped Martinez's coin into her pocket, alongside her grandfather's cartridge too. Talismans representing the dual nature of her service and the growing impossibility of keeping those worlds separate. The morning of Operation Iron, Serpent pre-dawn darkness shrouded Outpost Viper as the final briefing commenced. Colonel Harrington reviewed the mission parameters one last time, his voice crisp with professional authority despite the early hour. Intelligence suggests a high-value Taliban commander is using a remote village as a base, possibly holding an American aid worker hostage. 2 helicopters will insert the teams at separate locations near the target. Alpha Team, led by Lieutenant Wilson, will approach from the south. Bravo Team will establish a blocking position to the north. Specialist Morgan will accompany Alpha Team, positioned to provide immediate medical support. Harrington's gaze swept the assembled operators. One final note: latest intelligence indicates unusual activity in the target area. Possibility of specialized opposition beyond standard Taliban fighters. Maintain heightened awareness. It was as close as he could come to warning them about Crimson Crown without revealing classified information. Rebecca caught his momentary glance in her direction, a silent acknowledgement of their shared understanding. As the teams moved toward the helicopters, Rebecca felt Wilson fall into step beside her. His voice was pitched just for her ears. Those skills you're hiding, Doc, they officially don't exist. But if things go sideways out there today, and you see something the rest of us don't hesitate. Clear. She met his gaze steadily. Clear, sir. The helicopters lifted off as the first rays of sunlight painted the mountaintops in brilliant gold. Below, the rugged landscape of Kunar province unfolded terrain that had broken the ambitions of empires for centuries. Seated next to the door, Rebecca used these final minutes to center herself, focusing on her breathing in the technique Harold had taught her for steadying both mind and body. Hold out, hold. Finding the natural pause between heartbeats when perfect stillness existed. When she opened her eyes, she found Wilson watching her with quiet assessment. Controlled breathing helps manage stress hormones, she explained over the headset. He nodded. Snipers use the same technique. The comment hung between them, an acknowledgement, rather than an accusation. As the helicopter began its descent toward a small clearing 2 kilometers from the target village, Rebecca performed a final equipment check. Her primary role remained clear: combat medic responsible for the health and survival of the operators. But beneath that identity lay the inheritance of generations of Morgans, trained to see what others missed and act when necessary. The helicopter touched down in the swirl of dust and vegetation. Delta operators deployed with practiced efficiency, establishing a security perimeter within seconds. Rebecca followed, medical pack secure on her back, moving with quiet competence that had earned grudging respect. As they began their movement toward the target, she scanned the surrounding ridgelines with attention that went beyond medical concern. The Morgan eye assessed sightlines, calculated distances, identified potential firing positions, knowledge she had sworn to use only for protection, never for harm. 2 hours into their approach, Alpha Team reached a rocky outcropping overlooking the target village. Wilson signaled for a halt, deploying his men in defensive positions while he surveyed the settlement through high-powered binoculars. Doc, Wilson called softly, waving her over. Take a look. He handed her the binoculars, pointing toward the village. Central building with the metal roof. Notice anything? Rebecca adjusted the focus, scanning the structure. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Just another mud brick building with corrugated metal roofing, common in these mountain communities. Then she saw it. A slight discoloration on the roofline. A pattern of wear inconsistent with normal weather exposure. Observation post, she said without hesitation. Roof's been accessed regularly. See the wear pattern on the eastern edge? Someone's been lying there, watching. Wilson nodded grimly. Exactly. And those footpaths leading to the north ridge? Rebecca studied the faint trails snaking up the mountainside. Too uniform for goat herders. Professional movement patterns. Disciplined, consistent use of the same routes. You've got quite an eye for someone with medical training, Wilson remarked, his tone making it clear he knew exactly why she could spot these details. Before she could respond, Martinez crawled up beside them. Boss, found something you need to see. He led them to a position 30 meters east, where a shallow depression in the rocky soil revealed what appeared to be a freshly discarded wrapper distinctive. Dark green packaging with Cyrillic lettering. Russian RE, Martinez identified. Not Taliban standard issue. Rebecca picked it up carefully, examining the lot number printed on the back. This is recent production. Special Forces quality, not regular Army. How the hell do you know that? Martinez asked, then immediately waved off his own question. Never mind, don't want to know. Wilson studied the packaging, then looked at Rebecca. What else can you tell me about this area? What are you seeing that we're not? The question was a turning point, a direct invitation to utilize her hidden expertise. Rebecca hesitated only briefly before deciding that protecting these men outweighed maintaining her cover. The village layout is defensive. Buildings arranged to funnel approaching forces into predetermined kill zones. Those irrigation ditches aren't just for agriculture. They're positioned to provide covered movement for defenders. She pointed to the northern ridge. 3 primary sniper positions based on optimal fields of fire. If I were setting up an ambush, that's where I'd place my best shooters. Wilson absorbed this assessment without surprise. Recommendations? Change our approach. Come in from the east, using that dry riverbed for cover. It's the one angle they've left relatively undefended, probably because the terrain is difficult. And if we encounter specialized opposition? The question's subtext was clear. Wilson was asking if she was prepared to use her true skills if necessary. I'll do whatever is required to ensure the team's survival, sir. Wilson held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Martinez, radio the colonel. Tell him we're adjusting our approach due to signs of professional opposition. Request, Bravo. Team reposition to cover the northern ridge. As Martinez moved away to make the call, Wilson turned back to Rebecca. If this goes sideways, Morgan, I need to know you're all in. No more pretending. I made a promise to my grandfather to use my skills to save lives, not take them, she replied quietly. But sometimes saving lives means removing the threat. Wilson seemed satisfied with this answer. Stay close. If your medical skills are needed, that's priority. But if those other skills become necessary, he left the statement unfinished. Martinez returned, his expression grim. Comms are being jammed. Can't reach the colonel or Bravo team. Wilson's face hardened. That settles it. We're not dealing with standard Taliban. Professional electronic warfare capability means we're walking into something much bigger. He gathered the team for a quick briefing, explaining the change in approach without revealing the full extent of their concerns. As the operators prepared to move out, Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air dot. The jamming of communications was a sophisticated tactic consistent with what she knew of Crimson Crown's capabilities. Under her breath, she murmured the words etched on her grandfather's cartridge. Shoot in the space between heartbeats. Today, that space might be the difference between life and death for everyone in Alpha Team. The first shot came as a whisper. Rather than a crack, the signature of a suppressed high-caliber rifle. One of the point men dropped instantly, a precision shot to the upper chest, just above his body armor. Sniper. Wilson hissed as the team scrambled for cover. Northern Ridge. Professional grade. Rebecca was already moving, medical instincts taking precedence as she low-crawled toward the fallen operator. Blood was spreading rapidly across his chest. The round had found the gap between protective plates. I need to get to him now, she called to Wilson. Too exposed, he responded. We need to neutralize that shooter first. Another shot struck inches from Rebecca's position, sending fragments of rock spraying across her face. This wasn't random fire. The sniper was deliberately targeting her, recognizing the medic as a priority dot in that moment, as she watched the wounded operator's life literally bleeding away while pinned down by precise enemy fire. Rebecca Morgan faced the choice she had been avoiding for 5 years. The fallen operator's rifle lay beside him, an M110 semi-automatic sniper system, already equipped with an advanced optic. Her gaze locked on it, muscle memory stirring, her grandfather's voice echoing in her mind. Sometimes the greatest protection comes from eliminating the threat. Wilson, seeing her hesitation, shouted over the increasing gunfire, "Morgan, we need those skills now, or we're all dead." Time seemed to slow as Rebecca made her decision. With a silent apology to her grandfather, she reached for the rifle. The M110's weight felt both foreign and familiar in Rebecca's hands. Abaka's hands, Abasha reached for the rifle. The M110's weight felt both foreign and familiar in Rebecca's hands. Sensation like returning to a childhood home where everything was simultaneously strange and perfectly known. 5 years of deliberately avoiding this moment collapsed in an instant of pure necessity. "Cover me," Wilson shouted to the rest of the team as they laid down suppressive fire toward the northern ridge. Rebecca moved with fluid precision to a position behind a large boulder, the rifle already tucked against her shoulder. Her breathing slowed automatically. In, hold, out, hold. Finding that perfect stillness between heartbeats that her grandfather had drilled into her since childhood. Through the scope, the harsh Afghan landscape transformed into a mathematical grid. Distances, elevations, angles all calculated unconsciously by the Morgan eye. The wind rippled through scrub brush on the hillside, telling her everything she needed to know about direction and speed. There, she whispered to herself, spotting the faintest disturbance of light and shadow in a rocky outcropping 847 meters away. No ordinary soldier would have noticed it, but to Rebecca, the sniper's position might as well have been illuminated with floodlights. She made minute adjustments for elevation and wind, her fingers settling on the trigger with practiced ease. In the space between heartbeats, she squeezed the rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the enemy sniper jerk backward, his position suddenly vacant. One shot, one elimination, but her instincts screamed that this wasn't over. These weren't Taliban fighters. This was Crimson Crown. They would operate in coordinated teams. "Second shooter," she called out, already swinging the rifle to a new position on the ridge. Eastern outcropping, behind the dead tree. Wilson didn't question how she knew. "Everyone stay down." Rebecca found the second sniper just as he was repositioning, clearly alarmed by the loss of his teammate. The distance was greater 923 meters. But the Morgan eye made the necessary calculations instantly. Her second shot cracked across the valley. "Confirm that one's down," Martinez called. Watching through binoculars, Rebecca was already searching for the third shooter. Crimson Crown would use triangulated position standard Bloodhawk protocol. She mentally mapped the terrain, identifying the optimal location for the final member of the sniper team. "There's a third," she stated with calm certainty. "Western approach, using that rock formation for cover. He'll be moving to a secondary position now." Wilson stared at her with a mixture of awe and wariness. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because it's what I would do," she replied simply, continuing to scan through the scope. The movement was almost imperceptible. A slight shift of shadow behind a cluster of rocks 1,000 meters away. An impossible shot for most marksmen, especially in these conditions. But Rebecca Morgan wasn't most marksmen. She adjusted her position slightly, factoring in the increased distance and subtle changes in wind patterns at that elevation. This time, when she fired, the round struck a metal fragment on the rock face first, deflecting at precisely the calculated angle to reach the concealed shooter. "Jesus Christ," Martinez breathed, watching through his binoculars as the third sniper collapsed. "That was a bank shot. You deliberately ricocheted that round." "Holy hell, Doc." Wilson's voice held equal parts awe and suspicion. "I've seen Olympic gold medalists who couldn't make that shot." Rebecca lowered the rifle, the momentary clarity of action fading as the implications of what she'd just done settled over her. 5 years of maintaining her promise, broken in the span of 30 seconds. But there was no time to dwell on moral reckonings. The wounded operator still needed immediate attention. "I need to get to Rodriguez now," she said, already transitioning back to her role as medic, slinging the rifle across her back. Wilson nodded, dispatching 2 men to provide cover as Rebecca rushed to the fallen soldier. Her hands moved with the same precision they had shown on the rifle, now applying pressure to the wound, administering clotting agents, establishing an IV line with practiced efficiency. "Pneumothorax," she diagnosed, reaching for her chest decompression kit. The round fragmented on impact. "He's got shrapnel dangerously close to his subclavian artery." Martinez knelt beside her, serving as an extra set of hands. "Never seen anyone go from sniper to surgeon that fast," he remarked quietly, holding pressure where she directed. "Who are you really, Doc?" "Right now, I'm the person trying to save this man's life," she replied, focused entirely on the intricate procedure. "The rest can wait." As she worked, Wilson organized the remaining team members to secure their position. The efficiency of the Delta operators was evident. Despite the shock of what they'd witnessed, they maintained tactical discipline, establishing a defensive perimeter with overlapping fields of fire. Once Rodriguez was stabilized, Wilson returned to Rebecca's side. "That kind of shooting isn't taught in any medical school I've ever heard of," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. 3 targets, 3 shots, including a ricochet. "That shouldn't be possible." Rebecca met his gaze directly. "You're right. It's not standard military training." "Then what is it?" Before she could answer, a sound from farther up the valley caught their attention. The unmistakable thump of helicopter rotors approaching. "Could be our extraction," Martinez suggested, already raising his binoculars to scan the horizon. Wilson shook his head. "Too soon. Quick reaction force wouldn't reach us for at least another 30 minutes. He turned to Rebecca. "Any insights, Doc? Since you seem to know more than you've been letting on." Rebecca listened intently to the approaching aircraft. Her head tilted slightly. "Hip 17s, she identified with certainty. 2 of them, based on the rotor signature. "Not ours." Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Sound identification too? You're just full of surprises." "We need to move," she urged, already preparing Rodriguez for transport. "Those aren't random patrols. They're responding specifically to the loss of their sniper team." "How would they?" "Know already?" Martinez questioned. "Because they were waiting for us," Rebecca replied grimly. This whole operation was compromised from the start. Wilson studied her face for a moment, then made a decision. "Jenkins, Thompson, you're on Rodriguez. Everyone else, prepare to move out. We're heading east through the ravine system." As the team prepared to move, Wilson pulled Rebecca aside. "When we get back to base, assuming you and I are having a very long conversation about who you really are and what you're doing on my team." "Fair enough," she agreed. "But right now, I'm the best chance your men have of getting out. Of here alive. Prove it," Wilson challenged. "You've shown you can shoot. Now show me you can lead." The statement represented a fundamental shift in their relationship. Wilson wasn't just acknowledging her hidden skills, he was testing her capacity to transition from support personnel to tactical asset. "The helicopters will deploy blocking forces at the main exit points from this valley," Rebecca analyzed rapidly. "They'll expect us to use the northern passage since it's the most direct route back toward friendly territory. We should instead move southeast through this ravine system." She indicated a narrow passage barely visible among the rocky terrain. "It's more difficult terrain, but it offers consistent cover and emerges 3 kilometers east, while outside their likely containment perimeter." Wilson nodded, accepting her assessment. "Martinez, take point with Morgan. I'll coordinate our wounded. Move out." As the team began their dangerous journey through the narrow ravine, Rebecca found herself alongside Martinez, both scanning for threats with practiced vigilance. "So," Martinez said quietly as they navigated a particularly treacherous section, "you gonna tell me where a medic learns to shoot like that?" "Family tradition," she replied simply. "My grandfather started teaching me when I was 8. Martinez processed this without obvious reaction. Must have been one hell of a grandfather. "He was," Rebecca agreed, a note of pride entering her voice despite the circumstances. "He believed in being prepared for anything." "Well, I owe him a debt," Martinez said, gesturing toward his abdomen where Rebecca had treated a severe wound. 2 months earlier. "First, you saved my life with those magic hands of yours. Now you're getting us all out of an ambush with shooting skills I've never seen outside of Olympic competitions." Their conversation was interrupted by a radio transmission from Wilson. "Movement at R6. 2 teams descending from the northern ridge. They've picked up our trail." The pursuit had begun sooner than anticipated. Rebecca's mind rapidly calculated. Options. The Morgan Eye transforming the surrounding terrain into a tactical grid of opportunities and constraints. "There's a fork in the ravine system approximately 200 meters ahead," she informed Martinez. "The southern branch appears to dead end, but actually connects to a cave system that emerges near that distinctive rock formation to the east." Martinez studied her with newfound respect. "You've been here before?" "No," she admitted. "But my grandfather made sure I could read terrain like others read books." They reached the fork where Rebecca had indicated, the team regrouping briefly to assess their situation. Rodriguez remained stable, but required careful handling through the difficult terrain. "Southern branch," Rebecca recommended to Wilson. "It'll slow our pursuers. The confined space neutralizes their numerical advantage if they follow us in." Wilson nodded, trusting her judgment. "You heard the lady." Southern branch maintained tactical spacing. As they moved deeper into the narrowing passage, the sounds of pursuit grew more distant. The pursuing forces were apparently opting for the more obvious northern branch, at least initially. "They'll realize their mistake soon enough," Rebecca observed to Wilson as they navigated a particularly tight section of the ravine. "We need to be through the cave system before they correct course." The ravine eventually narrowed to a point where it appeared to terminate against a solid rock face. To untrained eyes, it seemed they had reached a dead end. "Now what?" Jenkins asked, anxiety evident in his voice despite his training. Rebecca moved directly to the rock face, her hands exploring the surface with practiced efficiency. Geological formations in this region often include limestone cave systems created by ancient water flows, she explained, fingers finding a narrow crevice partially obscured by overhanging rock. "Like this one." The opening was barely wide enough for a person to slip through sideways, invisible to casual observation, but offering access to a natural tunnel system beyond. "How did you know this was here?" Wilson asked, impressed despite his lingering suspicion. "Pattern recognition," Rebecca replied. "The water staining on the ravine walls, the type of rock formation, the prevailing wind direction, they all suggested an outlet had to exist." The team carefully maneuvered through the narrow entrance, Rodriguez's stretcher requiring particular care to navigate the confined space. Beyond the initial restriction, the cave opened into a more navigable tunnel system, illuminated by occasional light from fissures in the rock above. "Stay close to the right wall," Rebecca directed. "Cave systems like this often branch, and we want the passage that follows the water flow." Her guidance proved accurate, leading them through the complex underground network with surprising efficiency. After 20 minutes of careful progress, they emerged into a small box canyon, approximately half a kilometer from the distinctive rock formation Rebecca had identified earlier. "We're outside their likely search perimeter now," she observed, orienting herself quickly. "But we still need to establish communications and arrange extraction." Wilson attempted to reach base using their secure radio, but encountered only static. "Comms are still being jammed," he reported grimly. "Someone really doesn't want us calling for help." "Let me try something," Rebecca said, removing a small device from a hidden compartment in her medical pack. It resembled a standard field radio, but with subtle modifications to its antenna and control systems. "That's definitely not standard issue for a combat medic," Wilson observed. "No," she agreed simply. "It's not." After a series of precise calibrations, she established a connection on a frequency well outside standard military bands. "Outpost. Viper, this is Morgan. Authentication wingspan Delta 7. Require immediate extraction. Team compromised. 1 casualty." To everyone's surprise, an immediate response came through with perfect clarity. "Morgan, this is Viper Actual. Authentication confirmed. Quick reaction force diverted to your coordinates. Estimated time of arrival 30 minutes. Maintain position and report any contact." The voice belonged to Colonel Harrington, speaking on a frequency that should have been affected by the jamming technology targeting standard military communications. Wilson looked at Rebecca with renewed intensity. "That's a Bloodhawk frequency, isn't it? And Harrington knows exactly who you are." Before she could respond, Martinez called from his lookout position. Movement to the north. Multiple hostiles approaching along the ridgeline. Crimson Crown had corrected their course more quickly than anticipated, deploying forces to cut off the team's projected route to extraction. "We need to hold this position until extraction arrives," Wilson decided, already organizing defensive positions using the natural cover provided by the box canyon. "Morgan, given your unexpected talents, I'm putting you on overwatch. Northern approach, highest vantage point." The assignment represented a complete inversion of her official role, from support personnel focused on medical care to the team's primary defensive asset. But circumstances had rendered normal chain of command irrelevant. Survival now depended on utilizing every available advantage. Rebecca moved to the designated position, setting up the captured rifle with practiced efficiency. From this elevation, she had clear lines of fire to all likely approach routes, with natural cover protecting her from counter-sniper operations. Through the scope, she observed the approaching forces with the analytical precision of the Morgan eye. These weren't standard Taliban fighters, but professionals moving with tactical discipline. At least 12 operators deploying in coordinated fashion to establish containment positions around the box canyon. 12 hostiles moving in tactical formation, she reported through her radio. Standard pincer approach, establishing firing positions along both ridgelines. "Roger that," Wilson acknowledged. "Hold fire unless they commit to an assault. Extraction inbound. Priority is reaching that landing zone alive." For several tense minutes, a standoff ensued. The Delta team maintained defensive positions while Crimson Crown established a containment perimeter but refrained from direct assault. They seemed to be waiting for something. That something soon became apparent as a new helicopter approached from the east. Not a transport, but a smaller, more agile aircraft that Rebecca immediately recognized as a specialized gunship. "We've got bigger problems," she informed Wilson. "Attack helicopter incoming. Heavily modified for special operations, not standard military issue. Can you engage?" Wilson asked, understanding the dire implications for their extraction chances if the airspace remained contested. Rebecca calculated range, wind, and the helicopter's likely approach pattern with cold precision. "Yes," she confirmed, "but I'll need to reposition for an optimal firing solution." "Do it," Wilson authorized. "Martinez, provide cover for Morgan's movement." With Martinez laying down suppressive fire to discourage any Crimson Crown operators from exploiting her movement, Rebecca relocated to a narrow ledge, offering both cover and a clear line of sight to the approaching helicopter's most likely attack vector. The aircraft appeared in her scope, a civilian model extensively modified with military-grade weapon systems and sensors, painted in nondescript dark colors to minimize visibility. Its approach pattern suggested professional military piloting, establishing an attack run that would threaten the Delta team's position while remaining outside normal small arms range. But the Morgan, I didn't operate within normal parameters. Rebecca calculated the complex variables with intuitive speed, distance, wind speed, the helicopter's velocity, the minute adjustments needed to lead a target moving in three-dimensional space-time in the space between heartbeats. She squeezed the trigger. The first shot struck precisely where she had intended, the junction between the helicopter's main rotor assembly and the transmission housing, a vulnerability she recognized from her grandfather's detailed training on aircraft weak points. The helicopter lurched violently, black smoke immediately pouring from the damaged component. The pilot fought to maintain control as the aircraft veered away from its attack run, clearly struggling with compromised flight systems. Rebecca's second shot targeted the engine housing, creating a catastrophic failure that sent the helicopter into an uncontrolled descent approximately half a kilometer from their position. The crash was violent but not immediately explosive, suggesting the crew might have survived but would no longer pose an immediate threat. Target neutralized, she reported calmly, already returning her attention to the Crimson Crown ground forces. Holy, came Jenkins' voice over the radio, all evident despite his professional training. Did she just take down an attack helicopter with a sniper rifle? Focus on your sector, Wilson ordered, though his own voice carried a note of amazement. Extraction estimated time of arrival 20 minutes. We hold until then. The loss of their air support seemed to trigger a change in Crimson Crown's tactics. Rather than maintaining the standoff, they began a coordinated assault on the Delta team's position, utilizing cover of a sudden artillery, barrage mortar rounds impacting with precision designed to force the defenders into more vulnerable positions. There, making their play, Wilson observed grimly. Everyone maintained discipline. Morgan priority on their support weapons. Through her scope, Rebecca identified the mortar team providing fire support from a concealed position approximately 600 meters to the northwest. The Morgan eye calculated the shot with characteristic precision, her finger finding the trigger at the perfect moment between heartbeats. The mortar operator fell, the shot perfectly placed despite the challenging conditions. His assistant immediately moved to continue operations, but Rebecca's second shot found him as well, neutralizing the fire support position that had been coordinating the assault. Without their mortar support, the Crimson Crown assault lost momentum, their carefully planned maneuver dissolving into a more cautious approach that bought precious time for the Delta team. Extraction 60 seconds out, Wilson reported as the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters reached them. Prepare for immediate departure. Two Blackhawks appeared over the eastern ridge, approaching with the aggressive maneuvering characteristic of combat insertions. Miniguns mounted in their doors provided suppressive fire against the Crimson Crown positions, forcing the mercenaries to seek cover rather than continue their assault as the lead helicopter settled into a hover within the confined space of the box canyon. Its crew chief directed the Delta team to board with urgent hand signals. Wilson coordinated the loading sequence, ensuring Rodriguez was secured first, followed by the rest of the team in tactical withdrawal order. Morgan, time to move, Wilson called as the second helicopter maintained a covering position, its minigun suppressing any Crimson Crown attempt to interfere with the extraction. Rebecca provided final covering fire from her position, ensuring her teammates could reach the helicopter safely before beginning her own movement toward extraction. As she reached the waiting Black Hawk, a single shot cracked past her head, so close she felt the disturbed air against her cheek. Martinez reached out, physically pulling her into the helicopter as it began to lift. Someone really doesn't want you to leave, he observed, gesturing toward a distant ridgeline where a faint glint suggested a sniper's optic catching sunlight. "The feeling's mutual," Rebecca replied, settling into a seat as the Black Hawk gained altitude and speed, banking sharply to clear the ridgeline and establish a direct course back toward Outpost Viper Dot as the adrenaline of combat began to subside. The full implications of what had transpired settled over Rebecca. Her carefully maintained cover as a simple combat medic had been irrevocably shattered. The skill she had suppressed for 5 years had emerged with undeniable clarity when circumstances demanded. Across the helicopter's cargo compartment, Wilson studied her with an unreadable expression, clearly processing the extraordinary capabilities she had demonstrated. The conversation he had promised would be uncomfortable but unavoidable once they returned to base. More concerning was the nature of their opposition. Crimson Crown had demonstrated resources and capabilities far beyond standard insurgent forces specialized. Equipment, tactical discipline, and most troublingly, advanced knowledge of Operation Iron Serpent that suggested access to classified intelligence. The brass cartridge hung heavy against Rebecca's chest beneath her uniform, its inscription more relevant than ever. Shoot in the space between heartbeats. Find clarity amidst chaos. Act with perfect precision regardless of circumstance. As the Black Hawk sped toward the relative safety of Outpost Viper, Rebecca Morgan confronted a fundamental truth. The promise she had made to her grandfather to use her skills only to heal, never to harm, had been broken by necessity. But perhaps the true meaning of his guidance lay not in rigid adherence to one aspect of her training over another, but in the harmonious integration of both, the healer and the hunter, that defined the Morgan legacy. The Morgan eye had awakened fully. There would be no returning to the comfortable fiction of being merely a combat medic. Whatever came next would require embracing her complete inheritance. For better or worse. 6 hours after Operation Iron Serpent, the command center at Outpost Viper was quieter than usual, most personnel having been cleared out to allow for what Colonel Harrington had termed a necessary debriefing. Rebecca sat across from him and Lieutenant Wilson, the weight of recent events settling over the room like a heavy shroud. "What happened out there changes everything," Harrington began, his weathered hands folded on the metal table between them. "Your cover is blown, Morgan. After what Wilson's team witnessed, there's no going back to pretending you're just another combat medic." Wilson leaned forward, his expression intense but not hostile. "I need to understand what we're really dealing with here. That shooting display wasn't just exceptional, it was impossible. 3 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding anything I've seen from our best snipers, including a ricochet shot that shouldn't have been mathematically feasible." Rebecca met their gazes steadily. The time for half-truths and misdirection had passed. "The Morgan eye isn't just enhanced visual processing," she began. "It's a neurological integration that allows me to calculate trajectories, wind effects, and ballistic solutions almost instantaneously. What takes most marksmen minutes of preparation, I can do in seconds." "And your grandfather possessed the same ability," Harrington added. "He was perhaps the most gifted Morgan in 3 generations until you." Wilson's eyes narrowed. "You've known about this all along. You specifically requested her from my team, knowing exactly what she was capable of." "I suspected," Harrington corrected. Harold spoke of Rebecca's potential, but claimed she had chosen a different path after his death. Medical school, combat medicine, a commitment to healing rather than killing. He studied Rebecca's face. "What changed your mind out there?" "Nothing changed," Rebecca replied firmly. "I still believe in my promise to use these abilities to save lives. But I've learned that sometimes saving lives requires removing threats that standard medical intervention can't address." Wilson absorbed this for a moment. "The way you read that terrain, identified the tactical situation, led us through that cave system. That's not just marksmanship. That's comprehensive military training at the highest level. My grandfather began teaching me when I was 8, Rebecca acknowledged. Not just shooting, but tactics, terrain analysis, threat assessment. He said the Morgan eye was useless without the judgment to know when and how to use it. Harrington reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a folder marked with classification. Stamps. There's something else you need to know. The opposition you face today, Crimson Crown, they're not just another private military company. They're directly connected to the corruption your grandfather died investigating. He opened the folder, revealing surveillance photographs of the helicopter Rebecca had shot down. Among the wreckage, recovery teams had found evidence that chilled her to the bone. The pilot was carrying identification papers for Raymond Keller, Harrington continued. The same Raymond Keller who was supposedly killed alongside your grandfather in Syria 5 years ago. Rebecca's blood went cold. He's alive. Very much so. And based on the resources committed to today's operation, he considers you a priority target. Harrington's expression was grave. They didn't just want to complete their mission. They specifically came for you. Wilson studied the photographs with professional interest. This level of coordination, the advanced equipment, the sophisticated intelligence, they knew exactly where we'd be and when. Our operation was compromised from the start, which raises uncomfortable questions about security within our own ranks, Harrington admitted. Crimson Crown has access to classified intelligence. That should be impossible to obtain through normal channels. Rebecca processed this information with the cold analytical precision of the Morgan eye. They're not just mercenaries working for the highest bidder. They're implementing a specific agenda, and I represent a threat to that agenda because of what my grandfather discovered. What exactly did Harold discover? Wilson asked. What was worth killing him to keep secret? Harrington exchanged a meaningful glance with Rebecca. Project Nightshade. A systematic effort to repurpose Bloodhawk assets for corporate interests under the guise of counterterrorism operations. Instead of preventing conflicts, they were creating them to serve specific financial objectives, including domestic operations, Rebecca added, remembering her grandfather's journal entries. They've been manipulating American foreign policy for decades, eliminating anyone who threatens their control. Wilson's expression hardened as the implications sank in. You're telling me there's a shadow organization operating within our own intelligence apparatus, using classified military assets for private gain? Was, Harrington corrected. After Harold's death, most of us assumed Nightshade had been contained. But today's events prove otherwise. Keller and his associates have continued their operations, possibly with even greater resources than before. Rebecca stood and moved to the window overlooking the compound. In the distance, she could see Martinez and the other operators from Alpha Team conducting equipment maintenance, their movements betraying none of the extraordinary events they had witnessed hours earlier. They know, she said quietly. Martinez, Jenkins, the others, they've seen what I can do. Word will spread. Would that be such a bad thing? Wilson asked. Your abilities saved lives today. My men understand the difference between necessary action and unnecessary violence. But others might not, Rebecca replied, turning back to face them. If word reaches the wrong people, I become either a valuable asset to be acquired or a dangerous liability to be eliminated. Harrington nodded grimly. Which is why we need to make a decision about your future, Morgan. Remaining here in your current capacity is no longer viable. Crimson Crown will return with greater resources, and next time they'll be prepared for your capabilities. What are my options? Rebecca asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Officially, you'll receive a medical discharge due to injuries sustained during Operation Iron Serpent, Harrington explained. Nothing in your record will indicate anything beyond exemplary service as a combat medic. Your true capabilities will remain classified, and unofficially, Unofficially, there are those of us within the legitimate intelligence community who remember what Bloodhawk was supposed to represent. We've been working quietly to identify and eliminate the Nightshade. Corruption. Harrington's voice carried a note of determination she hadn't heard before. We could use someone with your unique qualifications. Wilson interjected. Before you make any decisions, there's something else you should consider. My team, every one of them, would follow you into hell after what you did today. Whatever path you choose, you won't be walking it alone. The offer surprised Rebecca. Throughout her time at Outpost Viper, she had focused on earning respect for her medical skills while keeping her other abilities hidden. To learn that the operators were prepared to support her despite or perhaps because of the revelation of her true nature was both humbling and empowering. I need time to think, she said finally. 5 years ago, I made a promise to my grandfather. Today, I broke that promise to save lives. I need to understand what that means for who I am and what I'm supposed to become. Harrington stood and moved to a small safe concealed behind a tactical map. From it, he withdrew a familiar-looking brass cartridge identical to the one Rebecca wore around her neck. Harold gave me this before his final mission, he explained, holding it up to catch the light. Same inscription, same message. He said, if anything happened to him, I should give it to you when you were ready to understand its true meaning. Rebecca took the second cartridge, feeling its weight in her palm. What did he mean by that? Shoot in the space between heartbeats, Harrington quoted from memory. Harold told me it wasn't just about marksmanship precision. It was about finding perfect moral clarity in moments of extreme complexity, acting with absolute certainty. When the stakes couldn't be higher. The space between heartbeats, Rebecca repeated, a new understanding beginning to dawn. Not just a physical pause, but the mental and ethical pause. The moment when you have to choose between competing goods, between protecting some at the cost of others. Exactly, Harrington confirmed. Harold understood that the Morgan Eye wasn't just about exceptional marksmanship. It was about seeing clearly when others couldn't or wouldn't, making the hard choices that preserve what matters most. Wilson had been listening intently to this exchange. So what's the plan? We can't just pretend today didn't happen. Crimson Crown knows she's here, knows what she's capable of. They'll keep coming. They will, Harrington agreed. But they'll be expecting the same Rebecca Morgan who's been hiding her abilities for 5 years. They won't be prepared for someone who's fully embraced what she is. Rebecca felt the weight of both cartridges in her hands, understanding finally clicking into place. Her grandfather hadn't been trying to limit her abilities with his promise. He'd been teaching her to use them responsibly. The distinction between healer and hunter was artificial when both served the same fundamental purpose, protecting innocent life. I want to see my grandfather's complete files, she said, her voice carrying a new note of authority. Everything he gathered about Nightshade, about Keller, about the corruption within Bloodhawk. If I'm going to finish what he started, I need to understand exactly what we're facing. Harrington smiled, the first genuine expression of approval she'd seen from him. Now you sound like Harold's granddaughter. The files are extensive, and much of the evidence is hidden in locations only he knew about. But there's someone who can help us access them. Who? Your grandfather's old friend in Maine, Frank Caldwell. Marine veteran, Harold's hunting partner. For 30 years. More importantly, he was Harold's emergency contact for certain ... contingencies. Rebecca nodded, remembering Frank from her grandfather's funeral. The gruff old Marine who'd spoken briefly with her mother, but whose eyes had held the same recognition she'd seen in other Bloodhawk operatives. When do we leave? She asked. We? Wilson interjected. You're talking about going back to the States, into what might be enemy territory, with Crimson Crown actively hunting you. I'm talking about finishing this, Rebecca replied firmly. my grandfather died trying to expose the truth about Nightshade. Today proved they're still operating, still corrupting everything Bloodhawk was supposed to represent. That ends now." Wilson studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Like I said, my team would follow you anywhere. If you were going after the people who killed your grandfather, count us in." "This isn't your fight," Rebecca protested. "Yes, it is," Wilson countered. "They compromised our mission, put my men at risk, tried to eliminate a member of my team. That makes it very much our fight." Harrington looked between them with evident satisfaction. "Harold would be proud. Both of you understand what he spent his life trying to protect. He moved to his secure communications equipment. I'll make the arrangements. Medical discharge paperwork for Morgan, emergency leave for Lieutenant Wilson and any volunteers from Alpha Team. Officially, you're all taking well-deserved rest after a difficult mission." "And unofficially?" Rebecca asked. "Unofficially, you're going hunting." 3 weeks later, Ridgeway, Maine. The autumn morning mist clung to the forest floor as Rebecca Morgan stood at the edge of her grandfather's property, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and fallen leaves. She was no longer Specialist Morgan, combat medic. That identity had died in the mountains of Afghanistan, replaced by something more complex and complete. Frank Caldwell emerged from the tree line with the silent movement of a man who'd spent decades perfecting the art of invisible approach. At 78, he remained broad-shouldered and imposing despite his prosthetic leg, his weathered face bearing the distinctive scars of combat long past. "Took you long enough to come home, Rebecca," he greeted her, his voice carrying warmth mixed with concern. "Harold always said you'd return when you were ready to embrace what you really are." "I'm not sure I know what that is yet," she admitted, gesturing toward the distant shape of Wilson and Martinez conducting perimeter security. "But I'm ready to find out." Frank nodded toward the two operators. "Good men to have at your back. Harold would approve." His expression grew serious. "Found something you need to see. Been waiting for the right time to share it." He led her to the old hunting cabin Harold had used for storage, its interior now revealing itself as far more than a simple outdoor retreat. Hidden panels concealed advanced communications equipment, detailed maps of the region, and most surprisingly, a wall covered with photographs and documents, connected by colored string, a comprehensive intelligence analysis spanning decades. "Your grandfather never stopped investigating," Frank explained, pointing to recent additions to the display. Even after his official retirement, he continued gathering evidence about Nightshade operations. What he found in those final months. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's bigger than anyone realized." Rebecca studied the interconnected web of information, the Morgan eye automatically processing patterns and connections. Corporate executives, government officials, military contractors all linked through a network of influence that extended far beyond simple mercenary operations. "They're not just manipulating foreign conflicts," she observed, tracing the connections with her finger. "They're influencing domestic policy, election outcomes, judicial appointments. They've created a shadow government accountable to no one but their own interests. And they're preparing for something major," Frank added, pointing to a series of recent intelligence reports. Increased activity, resource mobilization, personnel movements. Harold believed they were planning what he called the final consolidation, an operation designed to eliminate all remaining opposition within the legitimate intelligence community. Wilson approached from his security position, having monitored their conversation through secure communications. Intel from Harrington confirms increased Crimson Crown activity nationwide. Safe houses being activated, assets being moved into position. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon. Rebecca felt the familiar weight of her grandfather's cartridge against her skin, its inscription taking on deeper meaning with each Revelation. The space between heartbeats wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about finding perfect moral clarity in moments when the fate of institutions, of democracy itself, hung in the balance. "Show me the rest," she told Frank. Everything Harold gathered, every piece of evidence, every connection he made. "If we're going to stop them, I need to see the complete picture." Frank led them deeper into the cabin, revealing a hidden staircase descending to a reinforced bunker beneath. The underground facility rivaled anything Rebecca had seen in official installations. Secure communications, advanced computer systems, and walls lined with filing cabinets containing decades of meticulously organized intelligence. "Welcome to the real Bloodhawk," Frank said as they descended. Not the corrupted version Nightshade created, but Harold's vision of what the organization should have remained. A final safeguard against threats the conventional system couldn't address. At the center of the facility stood a large table covered with detailed plans, not for offensive operations, but for comprehensive exposure of Nightshade's network. Harold hadn't just been gathering evidence. He'd been preparing a coordinated revelation that would dismantle the entire corrupt structure. This was his final mission, Frank explained. Not the Syria operation that killed him, but this, a complete expose that would restore accountability to America's intelligence apparatus. Rebecca studied the plans with growing understanding. Her grandfather had spent years preparing for this moment, positioning loyal assets, securing evidence, creating redundant systems that would ensure the truth survived even if he didn't. He knew they would kill him, she realized. The Syria mission was a distraction. He let them think he was pursuing one threat while actually preparing to expose the entire network. "And he knew you would be the one to complete it," Frank confirmed. The Morgan eye, fully awakened and guided by the Morgan heart. Capable of seeing what others miss, acting with precision when precision matters most. Wilson had been studying the communications equipment with professional interest. This setup could reach every major media outlet, Congressional Oversight Committee, and international watchdog organization simultaneously. Instant, coordinated disclosure that would be impossible to suppress or discredit. That's the idea, Frank agreed. But it requires someone with the skills to activate the system under hostile conditions. Someone who can see threats coming, eliminate them efficiently, and maintain operational focus regardless of circumstances. Rebecca understood. This wasn't just about honoring her grandfather's memory or seeking justice for his death. This was about preserving the democratic principles that gave meaning to American military service, the ideals that made their sacrifices worthwhile. "When do we begin?" she asked. Frank smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Harold said you'd ask that question exactly that way." He moved to a secure terminal and began entering activation codes. "The system's been ready for years. We just needed someone worthy of Harold's legacy to trigger it." As the equipment came online, displays throughout the bunker illuminated with real-time intelligence feeds from around the country. Crimson Crown, positions, Nightshade operations, corporate connections, all the evidence Harold had gathered, organized and prepared for simultaneous release. "There's one more thing," Frank said, his voice taking on a ceremonial tone. He retrieved a small wooden case from a secured cabinet, opening it to reveal a custom-made rifle unlike anything Rebecca had ever seen. "Harold designed this specifically for you. Perfectly balanced for your physical proportions, optimized for the Morganized capabilities, accurate to ranges that shouldn't be possible." Rebecca lifted the weapon, feeling its perfect balance, understanding immediately that this was more than a tool. It was the physical embodiment of her grandfather's faith in her abilities and judgment. "He called it Heartbeat," Frank explained, "because he said you would know exactly when to use it in that perfect space between heartbeats, when moral clarity meets tactical necessity." Wilson watched this exchange with evident respect. Your grandfather planned everything, didn't he? Even bringing us here, ensuring you'd have the support you needed. Harold understood that the most important battles aren't fought by individuals, Frank replied. They're won by teams of people who share common principles and trust each other. Completely. Martinez's voice crackled through their communications from his overwatch position. Multiple vehicles approaching from the east. Professional movement patterns, tactical spacing. Looks like our friends have found us. Rebecca felt the familiar calm settle over her as the Morganite automatically assessed the tactical situation. This was the confrontation her grandfather had prepared her for, not just with Crimson Crown, but with the choice between the person she had been and the person she needed to become. Positions, she ordered, her voice carrying natural authority. Frank, initiate the disclosure protocol. Wilson, coordinate defensive positions. Martinez, maintain overwatch and call targets. As her team moved to execute their assignments, Rebecca checked her grandfather's rifle one final time. Through the bunker's periscope, she could see Crimson Crown operators deploying around the property, professional, disciplined, but unprepared for the level of coordination Harold had built into this final sanctuary. Harold's granddaughter, too. All stations, she spoke into the communication system, using the call sign her grandfather had established years earlier. Phoenix is active. Repeat. Phoenix is active. Execute exposure protocol in 30 seconds. Around the country, loyal Bloodhawk operatives received the signal they had been waiting for. Evidence would be simultaneously released to media outlets, congressional offices, and international observers. The truth about Nightshade would finally see daylight. But first, they had to survive the next 30 minutes. Through her scope, Rebecca acquired her first target, Raymond Keller himself, positioned on the ridgeline where he believed his elevated position provided tactical advantage. He had come personally to finish what he'd started in Syria, to eliminate the last threat to Nightshade's operations. The Morganite calculated distance, wind, elevation with perfect precision. 873 meters, an impossible shot for most marksmen, routine for someone with her abilities. In the space between heartbeats, Rebecca Morgan found perfect clarity. This wasn't about vengeance or personal retribution. This was about preserving the principles her grandfather had died defending, ensuring that future generations would inherit institutions worthy of their sacrifice. She squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect, exactly as Harold had trained her. Keller dropped without ever knowing what had ended his corruption of everything Bloodhawk represented. Phoenix complete, Frank announced as confirmations flooded in from around the country. Full disclosure initiated. Nightshade network exposed. The remaining Crimson Crown operators, realizing their mission had failed and their own exposure was imminent, began withdrawing from the property. They had come to silence the truth. Instead, they had triggered its complete revelation. As the immediate threat receded, Rebecca stood in the bunker her grandfather had prepared, surrounded by the team he had somehow known she would need. The brass cartridge hung warm against her skin, no longer a burden of conflicted loyalty, but a symbol of integrated purpose. The Morganite had found its true calling, seeing clearly when others couldn't, acting with precision when precision mattered most, protecting the innocent by whatever means necessary. Harold Morgan's legacy lived on, not in classified files or congressional testimony, but in the unwavering gaze of a woman who had learned to see what others missed. The difference between vengeance and justice, between power and purpose, between the person she had been and the guardian she had chosen to become. In the distance, the autumn sun broke through the morning mist, illuminating the forest where an 8-year-old girl had first learned to find the stillness between heartbeats. The training was complete, the legacy secure. Rebecca Morgan was finally, fully home. Epilogue 6 months later. The congressional hearings had concluded. The prosecutions were underway, and the structural reforms were being implemented. Nightshades network had been systematically dismantled, its assets seized, its operatives held accountable for their corruption of American intelligence capabilities. Rebecca stood again at Arlington National Cemetery, this time watching as her grandfather finally received the recognition he deserved. Harold Morgan's gravestone now bore the inscription he had earned: Patriot, Protector, Guardian of Truth. Frank Caldwell stood beside her, his weathered face solemn beneath his Marine Corps veteran's cap. "He would have been proud," he said, quietly, "not of the ceremony, but of what you chose to become." "I'm still becoming it," Rebecca replied, her hand unconsciously touching the brass cartridge that remained her constant companion. "Every day, every choice, every moment when I have to decide between competing goods." Wilson approached from the ceremony crowd, now wearing the insignia of his promotion to captain. "The new Bloodhawk Oversight Committee has approved your appointment," he informed her. "Director of Operational Integrity. Direct authority over all field activities and mission parameters." Rebecca nodded, accepting the responsibility her grandfather had always intended her to inherit. The Morganite would serve its true purpose, ensuring that power served principle rather than personal ambition, that institutions remained worthy of the sacrifices made in their name. "What's our first mission?" she asked. Wilson smiled. "Teaching the next generation. There are others like you out there, people with gifts that could serve the greater good if properly guided." Harold's network identified several potential candidates. "Then, we'd better get started," Rebecca decided. "The world needs guardians who understand that the greatest strength comes not from the weapons we carry, but from the wisdom to know when to use them." As they walked away from Arlington's hallowed grounds, Rebecca felt the profound satisfaction of a promise finally understood and fulfilled. She had kept faith with her grandfather's memory, not by avoiding her inheritance, but by embracing it completely. The Morganite would continue watching, seeing clearly when others couldn't, acting with perfect precision in the space between heartbeats where moral clarity met tactical necessity. The legacy lived on, as it always had, in the choices made by those willing to sacrifice personal comfort for principles larger than themselves. Harold Morgan's granddaughter was ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.